Some stories have nothing to do with home runs or strikeouts. No radar gun readings. No exit velocity numbers. No broadcast packages with dramatic music and slow-motion footage of a baseball disappearing into the upper deck of a stadium filled with 50,000 people who came specifically to watch one man do things that other men cannot do. Some stories are quieter than that. Smaller in their setting. Involving no audience except two people in a space that the rest of the world had already emptied out and moved on from. Involving no performance except the kind that happens when nobody is watching, which is, as anyone who has spent time around genuinely great people will tell you, the only performance that actually reveals who someone is. This story takes place in a dugout. Not during a game. After one. After the crowds had filed out and the broadcast trucks had packed their equipment and the stadium had begun its transition from the electric, charged environment of major league competition back into the quiet institutional space it occupies during the hours when baseball is not happening inside it. A janitor named Carlos had been working at Oracle Park for 11 years. He had cleaned dugouts after games for 11 years, had moved through the spaces where the best players in the sport had sat and competed and left behind the ordinary debris of professional athletic competition. Cups and sunflower seed shells and tape and the miscellaneous physical residue of a Major League Baseball game. He had done this work thousands of times. With the steady, professional focus of someone who takes pride in what they do regardless of whether anyone notices. On this particular night, after a game between the Giants and the Dodgers, Carlos arrived at the visiting dugout with his equipment and his 11 years of routine and the expectation of finding what he always found. What he found instead was Shohei Ohtani. Already cleaning. What happened in the next 20 minutes, the conversation, the specific words that Ohtani said, and the consideration that Carlos described later as something that touched his heart in a way he was not prepared for, is the story that traveled from a quiet dugout in San Francisco to every corner of the baseball world and beyond it. His shift begins when the last fan has left and the last vendor has closed and the last security guard has finished the sweep that confirms the public portions of the building are clear. This is the hour of the stadium that almost nobody sees, the transition between the public event and the private labor that makes the next public event possible. He has a route. 11 years of doing the same work in the same building gives a person a route, a specific sequence of spaces addressed in a specific order, optimized across years of experience into the most efficient path through the work that needs to be done. The visiting dugout falls at a particular point in that route. Not first. Not last. A middle stop, with a predictable scope of work and a predictable amount of time required to complete it. He arrived at the visiting dugout on this night with his cart and his supplies and the quiet, forward focus of a professional midway through his work. The lights in the dugout were on. This was not unusual. The stadium's post-game lighting sequence leaves certain areas illuminated for the cleanup crews that follow the event staff. Carlos registered the lights without particular attention and turned the corner into the dugout space. And stopped. Because the dugout was not empty. And the person in it was not a member of the Dodgers support staff or a clubhouse attendant finishing up their own post-game responsibilities. It was a player. Still in uniform, or partially so, the jersey and the pants, the gear that identifies a person as belonging to the competitive machinery of professional baseball rather than the maintenance machinery that follows it. Carlos recognized him immediately. 11 years of working in a major league stadium develops a specific familiarity with the players who pass through it. You learn their faces. You learn their builds. You learn the way certain players carry themselves in a space, the specific quality of their physical presence that is recognizable even from a distance and even in circumstances completely removed from the competitive context in which they are normally encountered. He recognized Ohtani. And Ohtani was holding a broom. He was not tidying in the casual sense, the absent-minded straightening of a space that a person performs while their attention is elsewhere. He was cleaning with the specific, focused attention of someone who had decided that the space required it and had committed to the task with the same intentionality he brings to everything. The sunflower seed shells that accumulate on the floor of a dugout during a major league game represent a specific kind of cleaning challenge. They are small and numerous and distribute themselves across the floor in patterns that require patient, methodical work to address completely. Carlos has cleaned them thousands of times. He knows exactly what the task involves. Ohtani was addressing the sunflower seed shells. He had also gathered the paper cups, the dozens of cups that accumulate around a dugout's water dispensers across 9 innings of professional competition, and consolidated them in the area near the dugout entrance where the waste collection is easiest to access. He had straightened the batting helmet rack, returning the helmets to the ordered configuration that the pre-game preparation establishes and the activity of a game inevitably disrupts. He had, in short, begun the work that Carlos had arrived to do. Carlos stood at the entrance to the dugout for a moment, processing the specific improbability of what he was seeing. Then Ohtani looked up. And smiled. Not profound. Not the kind of opening line that a writer would construct for a moment meant to be remembered. Simple in the way that genuine things are simple, without the self-consciousness of someone performing graciousness for an audience, without the careful construction of a person managing their public image in real time. He said he had made a mess. He gestured at the dugout floor with the broom in a way that communicated both acknowledgement of the mess and mild apology for its existence. He said he figured he should do something about it before leaving. Carlos found his voice and said what any person would say, that this was his job, that Ohtani didn't need to do this, that he should go ahead and he would take care of it. Ohtani's response to this was the first thing that Carlos would later describe as something that stayed with him. He said he knew it was Carlos's job. He said he respected the work completely, not in the performed, diplomatic way of someone offering a social pleasantry, but with the specific, direct sincerity of someone who means what he is saying and wants it to land as meaning rather than as politeness. He said he cleaned because he wanted to. Not because he felt obligated or because he was trying to demonstrate anything to anyone. Because leaving a space the way you found it, or better than you found it, is something he believes in. Something he has believed in since long before anyone in America knew his name. He kept cleaning while he said this. The broom continued moving. The speech, such as it was, did not pause the work. Carlos picked up his own equipment and started helping. This is important to say clearly. Because the temptation in telling a story like this is to reach for drama, to construct the conversation between two men cleaning a dugout as something cinematic, with the weight of the setting and the improbability of the encounter pressing every exchange into significance. The 20 minutes were ordinary. In the best possible sense of that word. They talked about baseball. Carlos, emboldened by the specific informality of a situation that had dissolved the normal distance between a stadium worker and a visiting player, asked questions that he would never have asked in any other context. About pitching. About the difference between what pitching feels like from the mound and what it looks like from the dugout. About whether the pitcher can hear the crowd or whether the concentration required filters the sound into something manageable. Ohtani answered. Genuinely. Not with the abbreviated, media-trained responses of a player managing an encounter he wants to conclude efficiently, but with the thoughtful engagement of someone who finds the questions interesting and is willing to take the time to answer them properly. He described the mound as a place where time moves differently. Where the crowd noise reaches a certain threshold and then becomes a kind of constant, not background silence but a consistent presence that the pitcher learns to incorporate rather than fight against. He described the feeling of a well-executed pitch in terms that were specific enough to be illuminating and simple enough to be accessible to someone whose relationship with baseball is as a witness rather than a participant. Carlos listened and cleaned and felt something that he would struggle to describe precisely when he tried to explain it to his colleagues the next day. The inadequacy of the word surreal to contain what the experience actually felt like, not surreal in the sense of dreamlike or impossible, but surreal in the sense of existing outside the ordinary categories that structure the world. A janitor and the best baseball player alive, cleaning a dugout together at 11 o'clock at night, talking about what pitching feels like. 11 years of cleaning major league stadiums means 11 years of observing the behavior of professional athletes in the spaces they occupy when the competitive environment is not demanding their performance. Carlos had observations. Things he had noticed about the differences between players, not in their athletic abilities, which he was not in a position to assess technically, but in their behavior in the spaces he cleaned. In how they treated those spaces. In how they interacted, or failed to interact, with the people whose job was to care for those spaces after they left. He told Ohtani this. Not as a complaint or as a pointed observation about any specific players or behavior patterns he had found disappointing. Simply as context, as a way of explaining why finding what he had found when he arrived at the dugout that night had produced the specific reaction it had produced. Most players, he said, never think about the dugout after they leave it. This is not a criticism. It is simply the reality of professional competition, the complete absorption in the game during the game, and the equally complete transition away from the game when the game is over. The dugout becomes the game's debris field. The cleanup is someone else's professional responsibility, and the players whose activity generated the debris have no particular reason to engage with its resolution. Ohtani listened to this with the quality of attention he had been bringing to the entire conversation. Then he said something that Carlos had not expected. He said he thinks about it every time. Carlos would repeat this sentence several times in the days that followed, when he told the story to colleagues and friends and eventually to the reporter who first published an account of what had happened in that dugout. He repeated it not because it was the most dramatic thing Ohtani said, it wasn't, but because of what followed it. Because of the explanation that came after the sentence, which transformed it from a simple statement of habit into a window into something about how Ohtani understands his relationship with the world he moves through. He said that every stadium he plays in, every dugout he occupies, there are people whose job is to care for those spaces before and after he uses them. People who arrived before him and will remain after him. People whose work makes his work possible in ways that are real and concrete and whose effort is often invisible precisely because it is done so well. He said he was raised to see that work. To acknowledge it. Not through performance, not through the conspicuous gestures of someone ensuring that their graciousness is visible and credited, but through the actual behavior of treating the spaces other people maintain with the respect that the effort of maintaining them deserves. He said cleaning the dugout is not a sacrifice. It is not a burden. It takes 5 minutes. It is simply the right thing to do when you have the 5 minutes available and the awareness that someone else will do it if you don't. He said this while sweeping sunflower seed shells in a stadium in San Francisco at 11 o'clock at night, without an audience, without cameras, without any mechanism by which the behavior could be converted into the kind of public recognition that famous people sometimes seek from their private virtues. Carlos finished his portion of the cleaning first. Ohtani kept going. It was what happened at the end of them. When the dugout was clean, genuinely clean, the specific standard that Carlos applies to his work when he does it with full attention and proper equipment, Ohtani set down the broom. He looked at the space with the evaluating attention of someone confirming that the work is complete. He seemed satisfied. He turned to leave. Carlos thanked him, the genuine thanks, not the reflexive social thanks, of someone who has been surprised by something and is attempting to communicate that the surprise was meaningful. Ohtani stopped at the entrance to the dugout. He turned back. He looked at Carlos directly, the specific quality of eye contact that communicates full presence, the opposite of the distracted, glancing acknowledgement that people sometimes offer when they want the social transaction of a goodbye to conclude without requiring their full attention. He said thank you. Not for the help with the cleaning. Not for the conversation. He said thank you for the work Carlos did every night. For the 11 years of arriving after everyone else had left and caring for the spaces that made the games possible. For doing work that most of the people those games existed for never thought about and would never see. He said it and then he waited a moment, not for a response, not for the reciprocal social transaction that thank yous typically generate, but in the way that people wait when they want to make sure that what they said has landed before they leave. Then he left. Carlos stood in the dugout for a moment after he was gone. He said later that he has been thanked by players before. That politeness is not uncommon in the people who pass through his professional world. That many of the athletes whose spaces he maintains are decent people who treat him with basic human respect. But he said what Ohtani did was different. Not in the words themselves are simple enough. In the quality of the attention behind them. In the specific feeling of being seen, fully and directly and without the slight distance that famous people sometimes maintain even in their most gracious moments, by someone whose attention you had not expected and whose presence in your professional world you had not anticipated. He said it touched his heart. He said he almost didn't tell anyone because he was afraid the telling would somehow diminish the private quality of what it had been. He told anyway. Because some things are too good to keep. Carlos told a colleague. The colleague told someone else. By the time it reached the reporter who first documented it, it had passed through enough hands that its emotional core had survived the transmission without distortion, which is itself a kind of quality test that stories either pass or fail depending on whether they are true in the deep sense that makes them worth repeating. This one passed. The baseball world received it with the specific warmth that stories about Ohtani's character generate, stories that exist entirely outside the statistical record of his performance but that the people who follow him closely have been accumulating for years. The dietary discipline. The uniform cleaned and returned carefully to the locker. The younger players listened to with genuine attention. The routines maintained with the same precision in the last week of the season as the first. The pattern is long and consistent and documented enough across enough separate sources and separate contexts that it cannot be explained as image management or the careful construction of a public persona. It is simply who he is. What he does when nobody is watching. What Carlos discovered when he arrived at a dugout that he expected to find empty and found instead already being cleaned by the most famous baseball player in the world. Thousands of nights. Thousands of spaces. Thousands of encounters with the residue of professional baseball games and the occasional, unpredictable encounter with the humans who produced them. Carlos says this was different from all of it. Not because of who Ohtani is, not because of the records and the milestones and the historical significance that his name carries in the sport. But because of what the 20 minutes actually contained. Two people cleaning a space together. A conversation about pitching and presence and the work that makes things possible. A thank you delivered with the quality of attention that makes a thank you mean something real. He said he went home that night and told his wife what had happened. He said she didn't believe him at first. He said he barely believed it himself. But the dugout had been clean when he left. Cleaner than he usually found it after a game. Cleaned by two people who, for 20 minutes in an empty stadium in San Francisco, had simply done the work together. The record books will carry what Ohtani does on the field. Carlos carries what he does off it. And he says that what he carries is better.